Okay, it's Mr. Udell here. I can't be in class, so this counts as your review for the test that you're going to have Friday for my fourth period class. I'm not exactly sure what you see on the screen right now, but I'm hoping you can see over to the left side the essays from the review sheet, numbered 1 through 6, and on the right-hand side you should be able to see the slides that we did from class. And I'm going to go through each of the essay questions, show you the slides that are relevant to the question, and talk you through some of the answers to make sure we're all on the same page. So, first question says, what does it mean to say our country believes in majority rules and minority rights? And the thing to always remember when we talk about this in this class is minority could be different people every time. All the minority means are the people who lost the vote, because the majority makes the rules, but the smaller group does not lose its rights. So when we went through all these freedoms here in the Bill of Rights that you see going across, and then we tried to answer these 4 questions that I gave you that really are not answerable in any sort of easy way. If we take, for example, question number 4, can the government stop a person from giving a speech to a rowdy and potentially violent crowd? And we look at it on this diagram, we see in the middle that the majority would probably like to make some rules preventing people from getting crowds really upset and angry, because they don't want to live that way. They don't want their property burned. They don't want people rioting. But on the other hand, individuals who want to say things, oftentimes they know the majority feels anytime they say anything that they are being rowdy and violent and they should be silenced. And those are difficult things to balance. So we would say that this particular thing falls in this gray area between where the majority rules and the minority has rights. We know the majority can protect itself from destruction of property. We know the minority can say unpopular things, but we're not sure where it would fall in the middle. And pretty much every other question we did in this unit dealt with the same thing about the gray areas. Looking back to your review sheet, you could use an example of religious freedom, you could use examples from the democratic freedoms, you could use examples from those people accused of crimes. All 3 of those things would be examples of how majority rule and minority rights come into conflict. The majority wants to make a rule against it. The minority says we have the right to do it. And it's not always hard to tell which is which. Okay, so the first one that we got into in some detail was dealing with your religious freedom. So we said there were 2 parts to your religious freedom. There was the Establishment Clause, right, and there was the Free Exercise Clause. And each one of these conflicts with majority rule. So we know that, like most freedoms, none of them are absolute, so the court has to decide when the freedom is allowed and when the majority can get involved. And the first one we dealt with was the Free Exercise Clause. And the overly simplified definition, which was fine to start with, was freely do your religion. But then we said, what if my religion requires me to stick a fork in your eye? Or what if my religion requires human sacrifice, or something that's not tolerable? And we know, we go back to this 1895 court case, Reynolds versus the United States, where Reynolds was a Mormon, engaged in polygamy, meaning had several wives at the same time, but the United States had a law that said, sorry pal, 1 spouse at a time. And the Supreme Court, as a result of this, realized they were never going to be able to say that you can do anything your religion says. So they said belief is different than action, meaning you can always believe what you want to do, but that doesn't mean you can do it if what you're doing is harmful to the community. And then what we know is this is a much better definition, but it's still really hard to say what's harmful. So we talked about the case of the Native Americans using the peyote, and the majority wanted to say they could stop people from doing peyote because it's an illegal drug and we would never be able to keep track of who is allowed to do it and who isn't. The minority said, we've been practicing this for 5,000 years. You moved to this continent, stole the land from us, put us on reservations. Now you're going to stop us from practicing our religion. We're not going to work when we're high. We're not driving when we're high. You can't stop us. So this is a gray area because you can see the arguments for both sides. As it turned out, the court ruled they could prohibit them from doing peyote. The second part of your religious freedom was the Establishment Clause, which says there's a wall of separation between church and state. But the example that I give, that obviously the fire department is going to come and put out a fire at a church or at a synagogue or a mosque, shows there's not really a wall. Sometimes the government does get involved with religion and sometimes it does not. And the test that we used for this one was called the lemon test. Right? And the lemon test was to see if the government and a religion can interact. So you asked yourself these three questions. Was there a non-religious purpose? Does it help or hinder religion? And does the government get entangled with religious practices? So in the case of putting out a fire at a church, obviously there's a non-religious purpose. It's not intended to help or hurt the religion, and it has nothing to do with the religious practices. So therefore, the government can get involved. So to summarize, the two parts of the religious freedom are free exercise, and the limiting test deals with belief and action, and the establishment clause, and the limiting test is the lemon test. All right, next up were our good friends, the democratic freedoms. And these were freedoms that we said were necessary in a country where the people rule. So, the first of these three was freedom of speech, by which we really mean freedom of expression, the right to express ideas that are oftentimes unpopular, which could be done written, spoken, dancing, art, hand gestures. So you have the right to express ideas. It is absolutely essential because the people have to be able to tell their government what they think. If they can't tell their government what they think, it's not a democracy. We came up with a lot of limits when it came to freedom of speech. You wouldn't need to know them all, but you would have to know some of them. For example, clear and present danger, right? That means if what you say is going to create an immediate physical harm to other people, like yelling fire in a crowded theater, or slanderous words, saying things that are false and ruining other people's reputation, obscenity, and then in some cases symbolic speech is not protected. Like, for instance, if you said, I'm going to show you what I think about you by lighting your house on fire, that would not be protected. But on the other hand, if you want to say something offensive or that I might find offensive, like flying a Nazi flag, you're allowed to do that. It's a symbolic speech. It's not speech I agree with, but it is protected speech. The second of our democratic freedoms was the freedom of assembly. And this was defined as the ability to meet in groups and express your views. We said this was necessary in a democracy because it's where power comes from. When people meet in groups, they start to feel empowered. They realize there are other people who think like they do. We know that the two big limits, the first one dealt with time, place, and manner, meaning we don't have to let you have a rally in the middle of a school day at an elementary school, and we don't have to let you have a rally at 4 o'clock in the morning when people are trying to sleep. But the thing we had to know is that if we made this rule, it had to be content neutral. So you can't make one set of rules for a group you do like and another set of rules for a group you don't like. So if you tell the Nazis they're not allowed to march at this time, then no one's allowed to march at that time. The rules have to be applied fairly. The second limitation dealt with private property, which seems obvious, but sometimes we don't think about the mall or the parking lot outside of a shopping center as private property, but it is, and you would not be allowed to have a meeting, a freedom of assembly meeting there without permission from the owner. The owner also can discriminate. So the owner could say, I'm going to let the Girl Scouts have a meeting, but not the Nazis. The government cannot do that at a private park. The government has to be content neutral. The last of our democratic freedoms was the freedom of the press, and it was defined the right to communicate through media and to report on government. This was absolutely needed so that citizens can keep track of what the government is doing. We need a watchdog. However, there were also some limits on this. The first was television and radio. The government labels indecent material. So all speech is you're prohibited from doing things that are obscene, but things that are not as bad as obscene, like for instance curse words like the S word and the F word, those things cannot be banned from from newspapers or magazines, but they can be banned from television because we have limits there that we don't have on regular press. Secondly, there are shield laws, which are laws that some states have to protect journalists from revealing confidential sources. Some states have these. The national government does not have them currently. So currently there is no protection for your sources unless you're willing to go to jail to defend it. Our next question was, what are the two basic mistakes any criminal justice system can make? And before we move on, I think I'm going to pause because I'm using a free version of this recording software, and I think it only lets me make 10-minute videos, and I'm at 9:43. I'll be back in a minute.